It's now my pleasure and privilege to introduce our next speaker, who is also a Vice Patron of RUSI New South Wales, Major General David Thomé. His CV is available on the web, but briefly, David was commissioned into infantry, has commanded a range of units at battalion and brigade level, and illustrates, in my opinion, one of the attractive powers of what I will call, in old-fashioned terms, citizen soldier. David is a practising barrister. He, by the way, is located in Brisbane, and could I just say that we are delighted the winds did not completely defeat you, sir, in your travel down, because as some of you would know, aviation is a bit challenging today. Nick, you need to do something about that later, but we'll leave it at this time. Could I acknowledge and thank our Vice Patron, Major General David Thomé, to ask him if he could give us an update on the command responsibilities and achievements of the 2nd Division. Could I remind you that that division was upgraded to a full Army Command level unit, and as such has taken on the enormous wide-ranging responsibilities of what we used to call anyway civil defence. It's a very, very challenging role, and I invite our Vice Patron to give us an update. Thank you, sir.
Your Excellency, President of RUSI, Michael, thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to be here with colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I just reiterate those points made by Major General Matt Pearce about the importance of the advocacy of RUSI and other organisations to have the debate on our defence and security environment. Without it, the voices are overwhelmed by some members of the commentariat who have a very fixed view on the domains and which is the most important. So as Matt described, our ability to operate across all 5 domains is a very important part of our future and our ability to meet our threat. I commence by acknowledging the Gadigal people and pay my respects to their leaders past, present and emerging. I also pay my respects to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who have served in the Australian Defence Force in peace and war. And as Commander 2nd Division, that's a particularly powerful acknowledgement because a large part of the Indigenous First Nations serving members are in the 2nd Division, particularly in our Regional Force Surveillance Group. I'm not I thought John early gave a really good view, particularly to the maritime domain of AUKUS. I'm a bit further down the food chain as it comes to AUKUS in terms of what it means, but perhaps what we should ask is, why is AUKUS important? And it's our strategic environment. The Defence Strategic Update in 2020 has sharpened our minds to the threats that face us as a nation. The Defence Strategic Review will take us in a more narrow way to decide how Defence organises itself around the environment it's in. And the role of the 2nd Division is evolving along on that journey. But I think history has a good place to start, and this is a map prepared by Lieutenant General Sir Ivan Mackay in 1941 when he was brought home from the war in Africa and charged with the defence of Australia. And this is what he presented to the National Cabinet. It was never endorsed, and because it's got the famous Brisbane line on there, but there's a fallacy about that. There was the concept that he was saying that he couldn't defend north of the Brisbane line. Rather, what he was accepting was that given that the full-time force was offshore fighting in World War II in the Africa campaign, the forces available for him meant that he had to make some hard choices about which parts of Australia would be heavily defended and which areas would be more lightly. Importantly, as part of his planning, he looked at how coalition forces, particularly US and UK, would come through Australia to operate and use Australia as a forward operating base into the region. I think AUKUS is an example that you can draw from history of its importance. And then that gets to a more contemporary view of how does the Australian Defence Force organise around its pacing threat. This is an ADF theatre concept. It's at the moment awaiting signature from the Chief of Defence Force. It talks about, at a doctrinal strategic level, how the Australian Defence Force will operate in our region. So it has 3 task force, and each of them are not controversial. We do each of those often separately, or in this example we might have to do them concurrently. So lead a task force to enable Australian security, that is the traditional civil defence, homeland defence, as part of a whole-of-government operation to ensure the safety of continental Australia. Lead a task force to fight and cooperate in an alliance. It doesn't matter where the goose egg is on the map. We've been doing that since Federation. Whether we've chosen to go and support allies in World War I, World War II, Korea and on, we've always been prepared to do that and lead and support a task force in regional operations. Interfet and our operations in East Timor, Timor-Leste now, and otherwise our support to our region, whether it's through exercises, training or humanitarian support, tsunamis, volcano eruptions, all of those things are what we do all of the time. So there's nothing controversial about the idea that we would have a task force arranged for each of those types of activities. The important bit is having a doctrinal capstone document that encapsulates those tasks so that we can start organising ourselves around that. And that gets to the 2nd Division. So if you were going to enable Australian defence, the 2nd Division and its dual role as Joint Task Force 629 is a good place to start. The division is everywhere in the country, consists of about 11,500 people operating from 140 bases. It's pretty much any town in Australia you will run into a member of the 2nd Division. It consists of state-based formations, brigades, infantry brigades, and a training brigade, and also the Regional Force Surveillance Group. The Regional Force Surveillance Group operates across Northern Australia and is integral to Maritime Border Command's operations for the defence of Australia's borders. So that laydown provides a really good framework if you go back to that map that General Ivan Mackay made, that our geography doesn't really change. So from 1941 to now, when I look at that geography and the laydown of the 2nd Division, we provide the command and control architecture to integrate at a whole of government level, whether it's at state or at Commonwealth. And we do that, and have been doing that, through our operations for the last couple of years. So our mission has been redefined, so we're no longer just to provide forces, so a force generation, but we're also a force employer. I'm expected as a divisional commander to have forces assigned to me to achieve those operational requirements. And today, right now, I have forces from Navy and Air Force and Army doing domestic operations in support of the New South Wales Government for Flood Assist 2. That's our 3rd flood operation for the year. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Structurally, not surprisingly, everyone likes a line diagram. The division is organised around its regional infantry brigades, RFSG, and then I've got a dotted line to 9 Brigade, because 9 Brigade is now an integrated brigade which consists of the reserve units of the old 9 Brigade, but 1 armoured regiment and 7 RAR. And they are now under Command Forces Command. But 9 Brigade in the Joint Task Force construct still has an important role to play in our planning for how we will support the Australian community. Under the Army Objective Force, the 2nd Division has been transforming. As Professor Howard described, we became a functional command on the 1st of July, came out from underneath the apron strings of Forces Command, and that's a journey for us. That is us owning our own future as a command, but more importantly, giving us agency in our new role as the Homeland Security role. We've been growing in Western Australia. We've raised the 10th Light Horse Regiment, equipped them with Hawkeye. We've raised an Engineer Regiment, 13th Engineer Regiment in Western Australia, utilising partnerships with organisations like BHP to grow capability. And then into next year will be our land combat capability review implementation, which is reintroducing a lot of the specialist skills that we've lost in the reserve infantry back into our battalion, so those specialist qualifications. And into the future is our land force support capability review, how we will organise to support us logistically. I just thought I'd throw that one up just to describe a bit of what we have been doing. So this is from Flood Assist earlier this year, where as a headquarters we ramped up from not very many people to 7,500 in about 10 days. And though it was a genuinely joint operation using assets from all services to support the communities of New South Wales and Queensland. At its peak, we had 4,500 people in an expeditionary setting in northern New South Wales, completely self-sufficient from a logistics perspective, operating, including with rotary wing helicopters. And then in southeast Queensland, we had a great maritime effect through the hydrography ships and the clearance diving teams working along the Brisbane River. It was truly a joint effort to provide that effect. So when we think through the roles of the 2nd Division, we don't think of ourselves completely in a land domain. We think of ourselves through all of the domains, but particularly maritime and air, and how we integrate each of those into the type of operation we're doing. And that extends to the type of operations which we would operate, what we call the littoral, so around Australia, where the Fleet Commander would be more interested in beyond the littoral. And in terms of our foundation warfighting, that remains a critical part of our journey. We've been conducting no-notice exercises as part of what's called Austral Shield. That was conducted at Townsville's Country Bank Stadium. That was a great activity. We did that with Special Operations Command and the State Police and federal agencies. That was an activity which tests both the contingency elements of the 2nd Division, but also how we integrate with state agencies and Commonwealth agencies. And this is one of the critical responsibilities of the division going forward. As we come out of almost 3 years of domestic operations, one of the things I always stress to everyone in the division that our centre line is foundation warfighting. We will come off that centre line to support the Australian community for domestic operations, because that's what the Defence Force does. But what we do need to get back to is that foundation warfighting. That's been more difficult in New South Wales than other parts of the country, but over the bulk of this year we have been able to return to that foundation warfighting for the value proposition of why many part-time soldiers join the Army is to do something, not only support their community but support the national interest. So as we go forward as a division, we're part of that modernisation of Army. We're also part of developing the concepts for how we operate in that homeland security environment. It's very much early days, much like the journey for AUKUS. You can see the reasoning behind it, but now that we are focused on it, it has given us an opportunity to look to the past, to learn from the past, so that we can go into the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for that visual summary as well as a very good overview.